your drag is trash.
Hello and welcome to Is It Drama, a drag podcast hosted by drag queen Misery May. And Misery loves company, so thank you so much for joining me today. I decided to record this right now because I have been creating some drag props for a video that I want to make and post to my YouTube channel after I get some more subscribers. And frankly, I'm rhinestoning a lot of stuff and the glue fumes were starting to get to me. Yes, all of my windows were open, fans were going, so it was well ventilated, but the smell was really bothering me. So I decided there's got to be no better time than right now with a horrible headache to record episode 7 of my podcast. So I decided to record this podcast episode after an interaction I had on Instagram that was not the most positive thing I've ever experienced, but also not the worst. And that interaction essentially made it really clear to me that this conversation needs to be had. I don't want to name names because I don't want to send negativity this person's way. But also, if they were to happen to listen to this podcast episode, I think that they might be able to learn something. And education and bettering the community is really what I want out of this podcast. So essentially what happened, I was on Instagram and the majority of people I follow on there are drag performers. And I'm just going to check pronouns really quick because I don't want, even though I'm not naming the person, I don't want to use incorrect pronouns. So one moment, let's see. Okay, so this person doesn't have their pronouns listed on their Instagram, but they do drag as a queen, so I will be using she, her pronouns. I was on Instagram the other day and I saw a photo from this drag queen, and this photo showed an interaction between this drag queen and an audience member. And based solely on looking at the photo, it was unclear if the audience member was behaving in a consensual manner towards this drag queen. Now, this was a photo posted by the drag queen on her own page, to be very clear. And the caption was clearly tongue-in-cheek, meant to be a joke. Now, you might be thinking, Misery, why would someone post a photo of themselves experiencing something that wasn't consensual on their own social media platforms? In fact, later on in the story, several people did ask me that. And to be clear, something might have happened to this person and maybe it wasn't consensual, but they didn't realize it as being assault or anything at the time. That is a possibility. Based on the information provided in the caption of this photo, there was very little to go on. So when I saw the photo, I commented, "Drag is not consent. WTF." My statement is 100% true. And someone who was not the drag queen immediately responded saying like, "Oh, it's posed and it's fine and it's not an issue." And I was like, "How do you know?" But then the drag queen did comment and she did say, "Yes, drag is not consent, but this was consensual." And I responded to her and said, "Okay, good. I think you only deserve to have fun when you are in drag." There was another comment from the drag queen in response to me that was not very nice and actually led to me unfollowing her. But that comment has since been deleted, so that's why I'm not naming this drag queen or anything like that. We established that it was consensual, and that is all I needed to know because the caption and the image itself was not clarifying in that manner. So what's the big deal, Misery? Like, it's consensual and it's okay. So why are you making a whole podcast episode out of it? Here's the thing. If you are a drag performer, especially an AMAB drag performer, and you have a really huge audience, I think it's important for you to make sure that the messages you're conveying in the things you share with your audience don't cause problems for other drag performers. Now, for example, this drag queen said it was consensual for an audience member to interact with her in a way that there was physical contact. The thing is that this drag queen has a huge audience compared to me. I have like 24 Instagram followers and 15 YouTube subscribers, and I love all of them dearly, but at the end of the day, my reach to my audience is so much smaller than someone like this drag queen. And what her photo could potentially convey is that if you're an audience member at a drag show, it is a-okay to touch drag performers. If you are attending a drag show, consent should never be assumed. And that actually goes for outside of drag shows as well. But with a lot of drag queens, AMAB drag queens in particular, who have really huge audiences, who might be okay with allowing audience members to touch them, they're conveying this idea that touching a drag performer is normal and is acceptable and is something to be expected when you're at a drag show. And that might mean that someone from this drag queen's audience has that in their mind because of watching this drag queen perform. And then they might see me at a drag show and assume that I'm also okay with being touched because, well, it's a drag show. That's just what happens at drag shows. And that is dangerous. I think that there's a huge difference also between like AMAB and AFAB performers, just because sexism, misogyny, those things do exist. There are differences in how AFAB people and AMAB people are treated, and AFAB people, quite frankly, end up getting the short end of the stick when it comes to bodily autonomy, basic respect from other humans, pay, all sorts of things. And so I feel like AMAB drag queens probably aren't taking into consideration how their posts could impact people like me who are AFAB drag performers with smaller audiences who have to essentially live in the shadow of whatever these queens portray as normalized in drag culture. And it's just one of those things where everyone wants to act like, oh, it's just a joke or it's just fun and games. Like, we're just having fun at our drag shows. And I have in the past been belittled by local people for suggesting that, like, hey, maybe this shit isn't okay. But drag queens with larger platforms make people think that this is okay, so that when I go on stage, I end up having to not only, work harder to even get booked because I'm not an AMAB drag queen, but also I have to fight off all of these potential advances from audience members who think that because they paid to see me perform, that they are owed my body and access to my body because they paid to get into a show. It is so frustrating, and I think that it's something that has always been on my mind as a AFAB person, even outside of drag, and I think it's something that AMAB drag queens just don't think about. I was really, really upset by the way this drag queen reacted. She reacted with an explanation that her photo was consensual, but then she followed up with a comment that made it seem as if she was belittling my concern about consent. When someone brings a concern about consent to you, your reaction should not be at all negative. If she had said, oh my gosh, yeah, I see what you're saying, because you're right, drag is not consent. Let me change my caption to add that information in there so anyone who comes across this photo understands that while it was consensual for me, it's not consensual for everyone else. And this reminded me of, I want to say it was in 2019, my drag father and I were participating in a drag show, and he had booked all the performers, and he made it clear at the beginning of the show that we would be handing out wristbands that said, like, different colors meant different things. Like, if someone had on a green wristband in the audience or as a performer, it meant that you're okay to dance on me and touch me. If there was a yellow wristband, it meant ask me first if it's okay, and I might be open to dancing with you or otherwise touching you. And then red wristbands meant, please just let me watch the show in peace. I don't want any physical interactions. And I was like, yeah, you know what? That's such an easy thing to do. And yet I don't think it's done regularly at shows that I'm familiar with. And to make it clear, I'm in the United States. I'm in a city that feels like a really small town sometimes. So if I have anyone listening who participates in a drag scene elsewhere where this is more common, I would love to hear about it. I would love to hear how your show might go about navigating consent for both performers and audience members, because it's a huge thing. Like my personal example, I am asexual. So when I go to drag shows, I can enjoy all sorts of drag performers. You could take your clothes off. You could, do a sexy dance, and I would be like, you go you. I'm loving it. You're killing it on stage. But what I wouldn't be okay with would be having a drag performer dance on me or touch me. That would make me feel uncomfortable. And the same thing goes for performers, maybe they want to be really sexy on stage, but they don't want people to come up and touch them, even when they're tipping them. There needs to be ways to manage consent that are very easily recognizable and can be consistently done. And I feel like there's a huge failure with that regard in the larger drag scene, just because a lot of the queens in particular with the biggest platforms make it seem as if every single performer wants to be touched, wants to have those types of interactions with audience members, so that when people go to these shows as audience members, that's what they're expecting. Nobody owes anyone their body for any reason at any point in time. To me, that's a really basic concept, but my interaction with this drag queen the other day made it clear that maybe that's not such an easy to understand concept, because I wasn't really calling out this drag queen. I wasn't calling her out. I was calling out the audience member who was touching her, because I couldn't tell if it was consensual, and she posted it. Maybe she didn't understand that it wasn't consensual, but I was more concerned for her because of the audience member's behavior. Nobody should be going to a drag show, either as a performer or an audience member, and have to worry about warding off unwanted advances from people on stage or off. Period. End of story. And I think that as a community, we need to make sure that we demand consent from performers and audience members, and that we make obtaining consent very simple so that there's no excuse about not getting it. But yeah, like I said, I was rhinestoning earlier. My head hurts from the smell of the glue. So I guess this is your reminder to always get consent. Always use your rhinestone glue in a well-ventilated area, and make sure you drink some water. I'll let y'all go for today. Thank you so much for listening to this ranty McRant about consent. If you have any questions or want to share stories with me, feel free to leave a comment. I am very happy to converse with people about these topics because they mean a lot to me. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.